Welcome to Daf in Hand, Masech Zevachim, Seder Kachim, Masech Zevachim, the first parak called Zevachim, Daf Base. Yiratzim Ufnecha, Shemela Kevela Kevela say maybe merit to teach the Daf, understand the Daf. The goal is to have a succinct and global comprehension, to see the forest for the trees, and to not to get lost in the details, but in addition to the details, to have a global comprehension, and when you finish, to know what we achieved and have an understanding. Which is why I called it Daf in Hand, a play on the pasuk of Ashrei mi shabola kan v'talmida biyodoi. Blessed is someone who has a Talmud in his hands and he knows what it is. He just learned the words, but has a comprehension of what we learned in today's daf, and that is what I will try to achieve with Hashem's help. I named it Daf in Hand, and anyone who has any questions or dedications can reach me at dafinhand@gmail.com, dafinhand@gmail.com. Today's daf is dedicated to my grandfather of blessed memory, Harav Moshe ben Reb Shalom Olav Shalom. Okay, we're starting Masech Zevachim, and we are also starting Seder Kachim, which is actually the fifth Seder, the fifth order of Talmud Bavli, which has its own introduction. We're doing Talmud Bavli. Seder Kachim has 11 Masechtas, starting with Korbonas, such as Korbonas sacrifices, which I'll discuss in a moment. You can be brought from animal, from flour, even wood can be a sacrifice, can be a korban, followed by Masechtas Chulin, which teaches us the laws of kosher and shchita, shechting, checking the lungs, or any other fatal illness or injury that the animal may have. We also have later on one of the Masechtas is Tomid, which gives us the daily schedule of the Beis Hamikdash, of the temple. Another Masechta is Midos, which gives us all the temple measurements and all the Mizbeach and everything, the Kodesh Kodeshim, where everything was placed. Ending with Masechtas Kinim, which is actually a bunch of math mind benders of different scenarios, but we'll leave that for last. The Talmud left that for last also. Okay, so now we start off dealing with Korbonas. Korbonas, which is basically translated as a sacrifice, is really a misnomer, but we'll explain that in a moment. First, the Korbonas originally started off, although we had Adam Rishon and Noah and Shem, Avram Yitzchak Yaakov, we brought Korbonas, but was only transmitted to the Jewish nation in all its formalities and rules in the Mishkan, the second year of the Mishkan when they were in the temple. They were not in the temple, when they went into the desert after they left Egypt, year 2448 Anamonda, which means the year of the earth, or 1312 BCE is when they left Egypt, went to Sinai Desert. The second year they were there, they had the Mishkan, which lasted for 39 years until they entered Israel, Eretz Yisrael. 480 years later, and during those 480, there were a series of private korbanos people were allowed to bring, and various sets of rules. 480 years later, they built the first temple, which stood for 410 years. After a 70-year hiatus, they built the second temple, which lasted for another 420 years, until its destruction in year 68. And we look forward to imminently to have the third Beis Hamikdash being built, which is one of the reasons the Chofetz Chaim explains that by learning Kodeshim, learning all the Masechtas, all the Korbanos, we hasten Mashiach, and we will be comfortable with it when Mashiach and the second and third Beis Hamikdash arrive imminently. We'll be comfortable in knowing what to do, not as some stranger arriving to a new paradigm, a new world, not knowing what's going on. All right. Kol Zevachim al the Korbanos. What is a korban? First of all, there are various kinds of korbanos. There is a chatas and asham, which is brought basically for sins, for sin forgiveness. You have shlomim, which is brought for people want to bring various forms of willing korbonas, certain kinds of various designations. Toidim, which is a korban brought for something where when we bench goimel nowadays, such as going through being sick or being in a dangerous situation or traveling overseas, we bench goimel, but it's basically built on the korban toidim, or other life cycle events such as a woman who gave birth, or a nazir, or somebody who in Torah had leprosy. These are all different forms of korbanos, and there's the standard nidarim v'nadav, somebody who obligates himself and dedicates himself to bring a korban or bring an animal to the Beis Hamikdash, or to bring this specific animal to the Beis Hamikdash. Those are all forms of korbanos. What is a korban? A korban is, well, it's a misnomer. It's called sacrifice, but that's not true. The only animal is sacrificing. We're just paying a couple of dollars and bringing a beautiful korban into the Beis Hamikdash, into the temple. Actually, there are many cases someone couldn't afford an animal, he brought a flower or some birds. The point of the sacrifice of the korban, well, it actually translates in Hebrew to korav, to getting close to Hashem. The korban is meant is an avenue for humans to come closer to Hashem. How this works? The Rambam actually calls it a chayk. It's in understanding how it works. There's different various variations of how to learn it. The Ramban has various interesting formats of the purpose of the korban, but we basically can agree it's a chayk. It's rules from Hashem, meant to somehow connect. It's used as an avenue to connect to Hashem. The Seder Kodshim is called Chachma, wisdom. And the Seder Shabbos is brought down, it's called wisdom, because we basically bend our intellect to attempt to fathom Hashem's intellect, or the intellect of bringing the korbanos as much as we can, of course, and have a deeper understanding and coming close to Hashem. Again, korban is coming close to Hashem. More so, when the second temple was scheduled to be, unfortunately, destroyed, and Hashem promised the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that in the time of Golus, when we will no longer have the ability to come to the Beis Hamikdash, to the temple, and bring korbanos, we will in its stead have the Shemoneh Esrei, the Amidah, the Tefillah of davening. In davening, unfortunately, which is going to be one of the thrusts, one of the what we're going to learn in the first Masech, in the first parak, people daven sometimes, the standard joke. There's a congregant, the rabbi, after Shachris went over to one of his congregants and gives him a big hearty Shalom Aleichem. The congregant looks at the rabbi, why am I getting the Shalom Aleichem? He says, well, I kind of observed while you were davening your Shemoneh Esrei, you had traveled to Florida, to China, to Israel, you stop over in Greece. By the time you came back, I'm giving you Shalom Aleichem for your return. We've all had those kind of Shemoneh Esreis, myself included. And they say that no two snowflakes are alike to its design. No two Shemoneh Esreis, no two Amidahs are alike, not just by different people, but each person himself. No two Shemoneh Esreis are alike, and we have that itself is a challenge to bring ourselves to davening the Shemoneh Esrei properly, which is the replacement or the step in for the korbanos. And we actually have a prayer, what's called Tefillah Kodim Tefillah, created by Reb Melech, Elimelech of Lezhensk, where he says, in quotes, we ask Hashem, please entice your mercy. No bad thoughts should come to us by davening, and if it's not bad thoughts, please not to space out. And It's a recognizable challenge of the evil inclination. The Satan wants to destroy our focus on davening, and we space out and we don't daven properly, and sometimes even worse. So that is that is our Shvanestres, and the Shvanestres imitates Korbonas. In the Korbonas, which is what we will be dealing with now in the first parak, in the first chapter of bringing a korban and having offline thoughts. Now, there are a few forms of negative thoughts or improper thoughts. First, the good thoughts, bringing the korban and having the proper intentions. That's fine and good. Then you can go a lower level of being spaced out, kind of, that's the human condition. And over there, usually it's not as bad. We will discuss the consequences of each one. Then you can have bad thoughts, such as when I want to bring what's called a korban oila, and by mistake I bring a korban shlomim, so therefore I thought of the wrong korban, which is worse than spaced out. Spaced out means thinking nothing. Here I thought the wrong one, and the worst of all is if I have actually thoughts which will disqualifying thoughts, such as I say I will eat this animal that I'm shechting, I'll eat it in a couple of days later. I'll take some home, I'll take it out of Yerushalayim, I'll eat it in the wrong time, the wrong place, and a few other disqualifying thoughts where then that's a total fail. Okay, this is our 12-minute introduction, and let's get down to the daf. Let's start the daf right now. Very good. Okay, I'm going to say starting inside. We start with the Mishnah. Today's daf, we're going to focus on three things basically. We're going to start with the Mishnah, which is going to tell us different kinds of korbonas and its accompanying disqualifying thoughts, or not as good thoughts as one should have, spaced out or whatever. We'll see. We'll get into that soon. Then we will start with, when we go in, what happens if you, instead of having the disqualifying thought, you have a spaced out thought, and also what to do with it, and what happens to the korban. Following with, we're going to compare a spaced out korban to a spaced out get, which is a document written to divorce a wife. So three things we'll be doing: the Mishnah with listing the korbonas, having spaced out thoughts, and comparing it to a get. Okay, here we go. Start the Mishnah. All Zevachim, all korbonas which were shechted for the wrong korban are kushers. For example, in oil, I took an oil and I shechted it. I started off. I slaughtered it for the name of Shlomim. The owner becomes kind of disenfranchised. The korban remains korban, but he didn't accomplish what he set out to do. If he has obligations, he still has to bring another korban and start again. The animal itself continues in its holiness and continues to be processed as a holy korban. But not all animals. When we said kol, there's a caveat, not all of them. Korban Pesach and Korban Chatos are no good. Pesach bismane, Pesach on Erev Pesach, which is the time Korban Pesach is at the time for doing Korban Pesach, or by Chatos, we call zman at any given time. If I take those korbanos and I thought of instead of the Chatos, I want to bring an oilam, then there's a total fail, and the animal is taken out of the Beis Hamikdash, and it's no good. That's Tanakam, the first person in the Mishnah. Eliezer Omer, Afa Osham. Osham is also included in this list. We said Chatas and Pesach, Osham also, and he summarizes a Pesach bismani, a Pesach on Erev Pesach, the Chatas Osham b'chol at any given time of the year. And why? He explains himself on the Eliezer, because a Chatas b'al chet, a Chatas comes to transgressing a sin, but Osham b'al chet, Osham also comes to transgressing a sin. So it's only logical. Ma chatas basula shloi lishma, just as chatas is possible lishma, Osham also possible shloi lishma. That's the second mandomer. The third one, Yosef ben Choyni Omer, He takes the mirror image one step further. We said a chatas and a pesach made for any other korban is possible. At the same thing in mirror effect, any other korban made for a chatas is also possible. Hanishchat l'shem pesach or l'shem chatas is pasulim. Now we come to the next mandomer. Shimon Achi Azariah. Shimon is the brother of Azariah. Rashi explains why was he called the brother of Azariah? Because Azariah sponsored Shimon in his learning. So therefore, all of Shimon's learning is for example, somebody who sponsors a daf, somebody who sponsors somebody in learning, is he gets credit on his name, and that's what the Mishnah says. Shimon, the brother of Azariah. So Shimon Achi Azariah says, Shachten Shem Gvoy man. If I took a korban and I upgraded it, I shechted it higher. For example, a kachim kalim, a light kachim to a kachim kedoshim, a holy kachim, a higher level. Kasher, and then it will be kosher, and we proceed as normal. The Shem Namach, if I downgrade it, such as chatos or oila, the Shem Namachim to downgrade it, then it's possible. Okay, so how does that work? Kachim kedoshim, shachten Shem kedoshim, kachim kalim is pursuing a holy korban that is shechted to a light holy is possible. However, kachim kalim shechted to kachim kedoshim is kasher. For another example, a bechorva ma'aser which is considered lower shechted l'shem kachim kedoshim is kasher. Excuse me, it's the line there. Bechorva ma'aser shechted l'shem shlomim, then its upgrade is kosher. But shlomim, which even though it's a kachim kalim, but it's sheshach l'shem b'chorva l'shem ma'aser, which is a downgrade, they are possible. So now we've covered all the korbonas, four different ways, four different opinions of what exactly is when it's kosher, when it's disenfranchised, or when it is totally rejected. Fine. That's the Gemorra. Normally, the Mishnah why would the kind of like the extended expression is kosher, but only it didn't become completely proper. Listen, why such an extended language? Listen, say something simple. And didn't work. Why did Mishnah take the time to make the longer language, which is something Mishnah avoids doing? You know why? To teach you it did not work for the owner. He's disenfranchised, and the owner has no longer a connection to this korban. But the korban itself, even though having lost its owner, it continues on the path and remains kosher. And you can't change anything from its original designation. You have to continue as it was meant to be. As Rava says, oil which is shachted for improper reasons, such as shlamim, still, even though it's disqualified, also this is you can't go and shecht it and spray the blood, which one of the procedures of a korban, and where they sprinkled it on the mizbeach. You can't ignore that. You have to continue. You must continue, even though you shechted it bad. You must continue and spritz it and sprinkle it properly. And why so? Where do we get that? Iboy sema svara, iboy sema kro. I either have a logic behind what I'm saying, or I can have a pasuk. I have them both actually, a logic and a pasuk. We're going to examine both of them. Iboy sema svara, a logic. Shem deshanava kol hana, because I changed things. Lishna b'avlezel, I should continue changing it. I'll give you an example. Somebody wakes up Yom Kippur and unfortunately has himself a coffee. So that's it? Yom Kippur's canceled? No, you keep doing what you need to do. If just because you messed up a little bit doesn't mean that you're totally derailed and you ignore it. If this korban you unfortunately had a mishap and was not, and even to the extent where the owner is disenfranchised, still the korban itself, unless it's a gross violation, it continues to be dedicated. It continues to be handled with its holiness. That is the logic. Or you could say, bring your pasuk, bring you from the straight from the Torah, which is what? Which is we have the pasuk Moses of the Sechel Tishma Basisa, something which is you dedicate, you must keep. as you made a neder and a dover. Now, neder and dover are two different things, which we'll discuss at a later time. Two different kinds of korbanos. Neder actually is something which you obligate yourself to bring. The dover is I obligate this specific animal. So, hein the dover, why do we call it in the dover? We turn to page 2 to the second side, that's based on the base. Why we call it the dover? In the neder, you start off saying kash in the darta as you made a neder, the dover. Which one is it? To teach you el im k'moish nedarta siso. If you continued and is the way you wanted to do it, made a neder, yay neder, let us say neder, that's fine and dandy. The iloyim, if you messed up and it's no longer neder, at least nedav yay, and it should be nedav. If nedav mishor l'shnuiba, may you change nedav? No. So therefore, we've learned. What have we learned so far today? We've learned that all the korbanos which I brought for the wrong one, such as oil for a shlomin, is not qualified. Then there's the gross violations, just as a chatos brought for something in toida, for example, or other kinds, that's totally disqualified. And the oil shem shlomin is partially disqualified, meaning the owner is disenfranchised, and will continue going. Now, all this so far is where we thought the wrong thought. Now I ask you a question. What happens instead of thinking the wrong thought, we just merely spaced out? Guy came to the Beis Hamikdash, couldn't park his camel or some other mishap, and he's busy thinking about his personal problems, like anyone who unfortunately spaces out. What is the halacha in such a kind of situation? So to address this, we bring a story, or not a story, a situation. Ravina told her papa, you really missed out. We had this beautiful kumzitz last night. In the tchum of Bechormach, in the radius of the city of Bechormach, you missed out. You were too far away. You couldn't come, and you missed out on this wonderful kumzitz. The Rama Rav, and what did they do by the kumzitz? The Rama Rav Milam Al Yisa'adoda. He asked two questions on you had to reconcile two different mishnahs, and they seemed to be in contradiction. Vishonale, and he answered it, and it was a wonderful discussion. Too bad you missed it. And we learned we had three of these questions, three answers, and you missed it. My Milamal, you say, what were these great things we discussed? The first one is as follows. Tanan, as in our Mishnah, it was actively done badly. So timer the shloil lishman. So let's learn from this. Let's derive from this. Because it was actively no good, that's why it's no good. But it wasn't actively no good, just spaced out. It would be good. Apparently, stoma is the equivalent of having it with proper thoughts. Spaced out equals proper thoughts. Okay, that is what seems to be by a carbon. For a minute, now I'm going to ask you a contradiction. I told you earlier, we're going to discuss get, where I space out. And it says as follows. We have a Mishnah telling me, Kol haget shenichtav shloil l'shem isha, a get which is actively written badly, not for this woman, but for another woman, because we know get has to be with proper, written for the proper person, is possible. So if it's written badly, then it's no good. This Tame, Nam apostle, and then Stam, in Stam, writing it, you learn also that if you write it without any thoughts for any woman, it also be possible. So how come by the korban, where we spaced out and no thoughts, it remains kosher, it remains proper, and by get without thoughts or without specific addressing the woman is no good. How come here it kind of use the word spaced out? How come a korban spaced out is good and by get spaced out is no good? And the answer is Rishona, you know why? Zevachim b'stam l'shmon only. You bring a korban, take a korban, you walk into the Beis Hamikdash, you have it over there, you're giving it over to the kohen to shech, or you sometimes you know how to shech, you shech it yourself. you travel and you bring in the korban, wherever you buy it, and you start the whole procedure. Um, Zevachim bestam l'shem l'shmon oimdim. Korban will continue in its by default to remain kosher because there's nothing to change it. Isha bestam lav l'gerish lo'imedis. A woman is not meant. A married woman is not expected to be divorced. A korban is expected to be processed. A woman is not expected to be divorced, and therefore a korban, which is by default, will continue on its trajectory and be kosher. Spaced out korban is good. A woman's trajectory is to remain married unless otherwise divorced. Therefore, spaced out get will be possible. Okay? So I asked and I answered, I reconciled that a korban is spaced out as kosher and the get spaced out is possible. Did I say that? The korban spaced out is kosher, a get spaced out is possible because they follow their trajectory and we're all good. Now, what we're going to do, since you told me this is the way of the Gemorra, you made two statements. You told me Zevachim Korbonas spaced out stomach is kosher, and you told me you get stomach without thought is possible. So I want to hear from you, where is your source that the korban stam is kosher? And then once we do that, we will later on ask, which we'll address tomorrow, where do you know that a get without thought is possible? So first we're going to do how do you know korban without thought is kosher? Basically, we're not going to look to which Gemorra teaches that, which pasuk teaches that. We want to source which Mishnah, where in the Talmud do we know this rule from? How do we know this? Elamer, perhaps let's go to our home base, right here to our Mishnah. The Tanan, all korbanos brought with the bad intentions, like I didn't say was not shechted l'shman. We just said it was shechted badly. So therefore, that would teach us you can't. I won't accept that. Why? Because gabe get name it also is the kind of kol a get. Even though I glossed over it before, but the proper reading kol a get shenichtav shaloi l'shem isha is written badly is possible. Loiketon and therefore meaning neutral would be good. It doesn't say loiketon shaloi nichtav l'shem isha wasn't written properly. It says it was written improperly. It's possible. So that won't be our source. You can't use that source that korban is possible, that korban is kosher. It won't work the source by get. So I'm asking, what is your source that a korban stam is possible, is kosher? El Mahal. Tanan, we learned in the next Mishnah, we're learning, even though our Mishnah says Lishman is no good, for the bad thoughts is no good, the next Mishnah discusses what happens to partially good and partially bad. To say it inside. Case of Lishman Lishman. How do you have a case of good and meant for the right reason, Lishman and for not the right reason, and that's no good? What's the case? For example, partially L'Shem Pesach. I started off processing it L'Shem Pesach with L'Shem Shlomim, and I ended up with L'Shem Shlomim. That would be no good. So you see, the Mishnah needed to tell me for Pesach is good and for Shlomim is no good, and I did for Pesach and I did for Shlomim. That's no good because the Pesach part got messed up. The Mishnah didn't tell me if I would have for Pesach and for blank for Shlomim, because that would have been good. So therefore, the fact that the Mishnah took the time to say L'Shem Shlomim, now the L'Shem Pesach L'Shem Shlomim, time of the Omer L'Shem Pesach L'Shem Shlomim. That's why it's no good. Hol L'Shem Pesach L'Stomach, had it been L'Shem Pesach L'Stomach, would be kosher. And that's why the Mishnah avoided using that term. Alma, you see, stomach, L'Shman Stomach. The fact that the Mishnah avoided using stomach and used Pesach and Shlomim shows me that the stomach would have been good. Remember, stomach means spaced out. Stomach would have been good. Well, no. Dil Mishana Hasan, over there, that Mishnah is different. Why? The Omer Kola Oisa Al Das V'Shoyni Yosef. If I started off making it for Pesach, then I would likely assume that, and without any thought, then it would continue like that. So therefore, the reason why it would be no good is because even the fact that I start off with Shem Pesach, it continues no good. So maybe El Sefer. What about the Sefer? Shloi Lishman Ulishman, where it says, so we can't know from the beginning because I started off badly, so it continues badly. What about the Sefer, the end of the Mishnah? It says Shloi Lishman Ulishman if I did it without good. And good, how is that? L'shem Shlomim Ulishem Pesach, for Shlomim and for Pesach, time is Omer Shlem Shlomim Ulishem Pesach. Is because I said for Shlomim and for Pesach, that's why it's no good. For Shlomim, by what is said, for Stam Ulishem Pesach, it would be kosher. So you see, Stam and Pesach would be kosher. It would be okay. Well, no, that also would have been no good for two reasons. The end gets influenced by the beginning, and therefore, since I say that Shlomim and Shem Pesach, maybe that's why it's no good because part of it is Pesach. Because I started off saying Lishmon, Lishmon, I continue the same kind of language. Therefore, but the bottom line, what do we just do here? We attempted to learn our source, that stomach, which we call spaced out, not thinking is good from this second Mishnah, and we couldn't do it because it was too intricately involved in Korban Pesach. So our second attempt of sourcing, where do we know that non-thinking is okay, failed. Now we go to the third one, and this one will stick. Elameh from the following. We have we have the ruling, and the person shechs the korban, he has to think of 6 different things. L'shem shisha dvarim zevach nizbach. Or 6 things. 1, l'shem zevach for the korban itself. L'shem zevayach for the person who is shechting it, usually mean the person bringing it. L'shem shem for us towards Hashem. L'shem ishim to be brought on the fires. L'shem reyach that the smell, the roast, the smoke will go upwards towards the heavens. And the Shem should be happy with it. And the Chatat Asham also l'shem chet. That's, you have to think of all these 6 or 7 things. Even if you only were not able to focus entirely, you only thought of one of these things, also will be kosher. Why so? Since it's so complicated and convoluted, and we were worried you might think of the wrong thing, Beit Din decided that it's enough for you to go think of not even just one of them, none of them. Just we said, you know what? Don't mess things up. Just be quiet, and you're coming in with the right thoughts. You're bringing it to the Beis Hamikdash, which is kind of like, don't see anything. It's going to work out. Tonight, Bezin here, asking. Bezin made it Tanai Bezin. The Loileim and the Shemai, don't say the Shemai altogether. Why? The Muslim name is Shloi the Shemai because you might say Shloi the Shemai, you might say things which you mess up your status of your korban. My advice, says Bezin, say nothing and it'll be good. Now here's the kicker. Here's what comes in. The Esau Kedait of Stam Apostle. You're telling me that Stam not saying anything, not thinking would be apostle would be disqualifying. You want to tell me kind of Bezin and Master Milsa would Bezin would come and institute a condition which would make the korban apostle? Of course not. So if Bezin instituted that you should be quiet and say nothing, that proves that is a perfect proof that saying nothing is kosher. And now we have proven, we have sourced it from this Mishnah that not thinking anything remains kosher on the Pesach. So let's just summarize. What did we do today? We brought down the Mishnah, bringing various korbanas and discussing if you have the wrong korban, such as one korban to another. We made a quick mention that back up, and even though it's wrong korban, but generally speaking, the korban remains valid, just disenfranchised to the owner. Sometimes it's possible, but sometimes just disenfranchised. The Mishnah the Gemorra started off saying that even though it's disenfranchised, you still continue it on its holiness. And then we brought reference to a kumzitz, where we brought a contradiction between korban and get, and we finalized that a korban is something which by default continues to be kosher, and get continues because a korban is meant to is meant to be, an animal is meant to be brought to Beis Hamikdash, is meant to be a korban. A woman is not meant to be divorced, therefore, writing a get without thinking would be puzzled by get. So we brought the Mishnah up to Korbonas. We said that you have to continue it on its own. Not thinking by korban is good. When we differentiated between a korban and a get, how do we know about a get? That we will learn tomorrow. Again, if you want to have any questions, you want to contact me, you can reach me at dafinhand@gmail.com. Have a good day.